right. Welcome everyone to the Disability Filibuster. This is number 2 of our 2022 broadcasts. And as you all know, we are in a virtual space. But I think today especially, it bears repeating that we come to that virtual space as a passionate and fully embodied human family, a family that shares our home with all of life on this much besieged planet. We are located on the lands which are the ancestral home places of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people from across Turtle Island. And we are grateful for the opportunity to live and work and meet one another across these lands and to build relationships founded in decency, generosity, and trust. We at the Disability Filibuster respect the teachings of our Indigenous knowledge keepers, and we will not shirk from our responsibility to be vigilant and diligent in practices of stewardship, reconciliation, and solidarity. And so with that acknowledgement as our foundation, let me introduce myself. I'm Catherine Fusi. I come to the filibuster today from Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. My pronouns are she, her. I appear on your screen as an older, white, spectacled woman positioned just behind an elaborate array of tubes and devices that are very techno-crypt, and directly in front of a few shelves which have some precious objects and some books about native plants and songbirds. I speak somewhat slowly and with deliberate effort. I am very, very happy to welcome today's co-host, my dear and trusted, grievous and irremediable comrade, Q.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, I'm Q. I come to you from the land of the Palaut and Chiquayak tribes of the Stalo Nation. These lands are also unceded. They were never given up. They are still fought for in many ways. I am a younger white queer, big glasses and oxygen on my face, and I am seated in front of my crip wall art, specifically artwork and letters from disabled people around the world that I have become friends with through mutual struggle and joy. I want to give an initial shout out to our awesome tech folks. Fenrir and Aslan are taking care of us today. Having done tech, I know it's always exciting until it's boring, and then it's exciting again. You want it to be boring. And I appreciate you folks a lot. I want to give a very brief explanation on why we do things in the webinar style for the Disability Filibuster. We do this because when we initially started this endeavor last year, we were subject to some terrible hate some very strong reactions to disabled people existing, quite simply. Disabled people existing and acknowledging multiple complicated forms of struggle, you know, not just white disability. And that put us on the radar of some very hateful groups. And so to protect everyone's mental and spiritual well-being in particular, we have it set up so that only the panelists are directly in the room and everyone else is watching some form of live stream, either on the Zoom platform or on YouTube or the website. Yeah, I think it's important that we acknowledge that, you know, it's not ideal that we can't have everyone in the room with us, and the place that that comes from. We are going to have things open for comment and discussion after each person, we go around and each person shares what you're bringing, what questions you're bringing to the table and what you want to discuss specifically. And we will make sure that each person is heard from. We have a big crew today, and we want to make sure we get all of your voices and thoughts on the table. That's the whole point of this thing, is that we're all here to learn from one another and to really be properly represented in complex and nuanced ways. Catherine, do you want to take it away with the introduction for Heidi's comments?
I certainly will, and this is great. I just saw Heidi's face pop up on the screen. Now, I happen to know, it's an insider clip thing, that Heidi was going to be about an hour late because of her routines of care and whatever. So, Heidi, I hope you're fully clothed and have been properly arranged for the day. Yep, she appears to be. So I think what I will do is, and there is her assistant, whose name I don't know, but it appears to be of the feline species. Anyway, Heidi, I was going to offer the information that you shared, but perhaps I'll do it this way. In a moment, we're going to stream the short video presentation that Heidi had presented, not knowing if she would be able to tune in until the very end of today's session. So we will do that, but before we do, Heidi, why don't you tell us where you are, and also I'll hand you a can of spray paint at the appropriate time, and you can instruct us what to do with it. Over to you.
I'm coming but I would like this. There is no right to die without a right to live.
Awesome. Heidi, shall I echo that for you?
Please.
Heidi is grateful to live, work, and play on the unceded territory of the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota, Sioux, Iroquois, Dene and Ojibwe, Soto, Anishinaabe nations. And she has instructed me to spray "No right to die without a right to live" on the walls. Thanks, Heidi. And now I think Finn is queued up to play your remarks for us. Thank you. And one of the things we do on the filibuster while tech stuff is happening is we pass the time of day. So I'm going to say that some of you may know of Heidi or know of her work. She has certainly been a really important and early contributor to the concept of medical ableism. And here she comes. My recollection is that there's a few seconds without sound, but it does come, so you may want to give it another moment. No sound yet. Heidi, do you remember where the sound begins? Forget it. Still no sound. Yeah. So when you, oh, Q, you're getting sound?
If y'all will give me one moment.
No problem.
It's a Zoom thing. It's not a me thing, I swear.
Okay. It's a filibuster thing. It's part of our ethos, isn't it, Q?
It's very important to us that you understand all of the ins and outs that make all of these things look smooth. I doubt that they ever are for any conference or panel. And we're just demystifying.
Yeah. Yeah, we're equipping Zoom is what we're doing.
Exactly. We know that you just want to see behind the curtain on all of the conferences and panels that everyone puts on. So we're granting you access, that's all.
Yep.
Let's see. There's just always so many settings that could be incorrect or you don't know about. You just have to do everything on the fly.
Okay, so we're gonna try this now. The audio should start in roughly 7 seconds.
Thanks, Ben.
Hello, good comrades. Because I'm not sure how much of today's disability filibuster I will actually be able to be present with you for, Catherine has asked me to prepare and pre-canned via text-to-speech some of my thoughts on the real and present danger that medical ableism poses for disabled people in this brave new world of MAID. The topic for today's filibuster is ableism, defined most simply as prejudice and discrimination based on disability. I am going to focus my comments on medical ableism. Research consistently indicates that ableist stereotypes, assumptions, and biases about the quality of life of people with disabilities are pervasive throughout healthcare, resulting in the devaluation and disparate treatment of people with disabilities. As disability ethicist Joel Reynolds notes, ableism is endemic to medicine. Quote, ableism has unfortunately been a central and unquestioned part of medicine across its history. If the idea that being normal is best is taken as common sense, evidence to the contrary will be judged as suspect, including the evidence that people with disabilities are often as happy as people without disabilities. Ableism is especially problematic for clinicians because insofar as it operates in the background of their knowledge and expertise, it can actively undermine best practices and negatively impact health outcomes without clinicians even realizing it. End quote. Given that endemic ableism in medicine is a condition which pre-existed the current pandemic, there is a sense in which it should be entirely unsurprising that the advent of COVID-19 has proven to be a very dangerous and potentially lethal complication for people with disabilities. Alice Wong, a leading U.S. disability rights activist and someone who uses a ventilator and wheelchair, reflected in the following terms on how others would likely judge the quality of her life. Quote, were I to contract coronavirus, I imagine a doctor might read my chart, look at me, and think I'm a waste of their efforts and precious resources that never should have been in shortage to begin with. He might even take my ventilator for other patients who have a better shot at survival than me. All of these hard choices doctors have to make primarily hurt those hit hardest, not the people who present as worthy investments of scarce resources. Who gets to make these hard choices and who bears the brunt of them is a matter of inequality and discrimination toward protected classes. End quote. As someone who has long been aware of both the prevalence and the perils of medical ableism, and as someone whose disabilities include a significant speech impairment, I've made it a rule never to go into ER without an aide or a friend with me to assist me with communication. This is because the risk of my not being able to make myself understood to clinicians and other healthcare personnel is great, and my risk of having an adverse outcome due to a combination of miscommunication with the medical team and the high probability that the prevalence of medical ableism could result in erroneous judgments being made about my quality of life is even greater. But the advent of COVID-19 suddenly rendered my policy of never going to ER alone not applicable. Thus it was that, in November of 2020, I entered ER entirely alone, in respiratory distress, and, frankly, terrified. Why was I terrified? Well, first of all, of course, there was the whole having trouble breathing thing, but also, there were memories of the numerous first-hand accounts that I'd heard over the years from friends and colleagues with disabilities who have had DNR orders arbitrarily placed on their charts without their knowledge, and who have consequently needed family and friends to monitor their charts for the appearance of unauthorized DNR orders, and to advocate for their removal. Similarly, there were more recent anecdotal accounts that I'd heard from friends and colleagues with disabilities about physicians asking them, repeatedly, whether they would want interventions that would generally be considered routine for non-disabled people, interventions such as receiving supplemental oxygen through nasal cannula, and then being asked, again, "Are you sure?" It was having all these things percolating in my mind that caused me to preemptively respond to the ER doc's inquiry about goals of care with all the clarity and force that my 82% oxygen saturated lungs could muster. R1. Over the years, I have often remarked that I should make and carry a card that says, "I have multiple physical disabilities caused by cerebral palsy. I am also a university professor who works in an ethics center and specializes in disability ethics. I respectfully ask that you keep both these things in mind when you interact with me." Unfortunately, I have never actually acted on this idea. This is because, as I've already alluded to, in pre-COVID times, it would have been unthinkable for me to go into ER on my own. Fortunately, I had two saving graces during my first 18 hours in ER that helped mitigate the potential hazards from my not having such a card. First of all of the friends, aides, and fraides, combination friend and aide, who would normally have been taking shifts being with me in hospital were now calling the hospital to check on me. This alerted the nursing staff to the fact that I was very much connected to a community of support outside the hospital. Secondly, I had the blessing of an exceptionally attentive nurse who combined my care with assisting me to make and receive phone calls and text messages. One such phone call was from my brother, saying that he'd just received a phone call from my doctor to discuss my diagnosis. With some consternation, I told my brother that I had yet to see said doctor. However, a couple of hours earlier, a resident had come in to take my medical history, or rather, he attempted to take my medical history. It was clear to me from my very brief interaction with him that none of my responses to his questions had registered with him. This, I surmised, was what prompted my attending physician to call my brother. A relevant piece of information about the division of labor in my family is that I have long been the go-to person for any and all medical decisions involving our aging parents, and, of course, myself. In return, my brother, the engineer, deals with all things logistical, practical, and not involving human emotion. But now, my poor brother, with all the tranquility of a deer caught in headlights, was compelled to relay the information he was given about my rather complex medical condition, as it had been related to him by my attending physician, who I had yet to meet. After I finished the call, I exclaimed to my nurse, who looked almost as exasperated as I felt, "You know, I'm a professor at the Ethics Center at the University of Alberta. I can handle conversations about my condition." After uttering an expletive, the nurse said, "I'm going to go find your doctor and make him come talk to you." I didn't actually see this, but I could envision her dragging the doctor by the ear to my bedside. At any rate, the doctor did come and have an actual conversation with me about my condition and treatment plan, and I'm happy to report that, for the remainder of my hospital stay, everyone on my treatment team interacted and engaged with me as they would with any other patient. Nevertheless, my experience has left me deeply concerned about what happens to people with physical and/or communication disabilities who are forced to go into ER alone due to pandemic restrictions, but who do not have the benefit of either an exceptionally observant and attentive nurse, or the status of having a job that's healthcare related. I soon became accustomed to hearing myself described in the following terms at every shift change: complicated pneumonia, R1. But then came the day that I went for a CT scan. Two nurses in radiology were looking through my chart, when one looked at the other and exclaimed, incredulously, "She's an R1," and shook her head. Any ostensible status I have as an ethics professor or a disability rights advocate was instantly stripped away, and I became a presumptively nonverbal, spastic quadriplegic, who already had a feeding tube, and now had complicated pneumonia. It was clear from this nurse's reaction to my goals of care that she could not imagine my life to be worth living. This is what medical ableism looks and feels like. I had a friend with disabilities who, like me, came down with pneumonia and went into ER. But, unlike me, she had been forced to live in a nursing home for many years, and had heard, "She's an R1, one too many times." So she changed her goals of care, agreed to forego what would otherwise have been routine treatment with oxygen, and died. This is what medical ableism, internalized, does. As those of us gathered here know all too well, the legalization and subsequent expansion of eligibility for MAID in Canada to include people with disabilities who are not at end of life has only exponentially increased the dangers of medical ableism. In view of this, the Canadian disability rights community simply cannot afford to succumb to battle fatigue. Rather, we must continue working to publicly expose the lethal dangers of medical ableism, even as we continue working to maintain personal networks of supports to help protect us from those dangers. Stay strong, friends.
Thank you, Heidi. There some very intense experiences to share with so many, and I really appreciate people who do so, especially in relation to fighting this so powerfully. So from here, I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, and I would ask you each to share a land acknowledgement, the land that you're coming from, and a brief visual description, and what you would spray paint on Parliament if you were given a spray can. And then any thoughts that you want to share at this moment about Heidi's statement. We're going to start, I think, with Lucia, if that's okay with you, Lucia. Would you mind giving us, again, that was your land acknowledgement, a brief visual description, what you would spray paint on Parliament, and any thoughts or comments you want to share about Heidi's statement.
Great, thanks, Q. So hi, everyone. I'm Lucia. I'm coming to you from unceded and stolen Coquitlam territory, which is colonially known as Port Coquitlam in British Columbia. Brief visual description: I'm a femme-presenting person of mixed Black ethnicity. I'm wearing glasses and a dark red hoodie, and I'm sitting in my bed, which you can see the headboard and a large kind of, what's the word, wreath, a fake wreath is behind me on the wall. What I would spray paint on Parliament, I think I said, like, keep expecting us, like we're gonna keep being here. So just set your watch, because every hour we're gonna keep being here. I'm still trying to sort of mentally process everything that Heidi said. I think was thinking about my own experiences in the ER during the pandemic, and sort of thinking about all the protocols and procedures that are meant to keep people safe during the pandemic. and how fundamentally those policies and procedures never operate from, like, the baseline for those procedures of safety is never disabled life, disabled bodies, disabled experiences. And I think I had a brief moment of hope that 2 years into a pandemic, those procedures, sorry, there's definitely some traffic that you might be able to hear in the background. I think I had some hope that those policies and procedures would include, patient advocates, or making space for people to have friends or caregivers accompany them safely to the ER, and realizing how the incredible abandonment in those spaces, where abandonment already exists. So just these layers of abandonment that are existing in those spaces. And I was thinking about the fact that for so many people, those moments of getting good care, as Heidi was mentioning, those are often like the surprise, like we're surprised when those moments happen, and how just profoundly I wish that just wasn't the exception to the rule, and how terrifying it is to me that it is. So sort of very foggy brain today, putting some thoughts together, but just very grateful to be in this space with all of you, and grateful for Heidi for starting us off with, yeah.
Thank you, Lucia. Joining you in the brain fog, absolutely. But I really appreciate the thoughts that you shared there. And I love Keep Expecting Us. That's fantastic. From here, we will go to Jennifer. I want to say your last name correctly. And is it Bombosh?
Absolutely, yes. You can say it many
Okay,
different
awesome.
ways, and I will always respond. Because
Got it.
Thank you, Q. I am very honored to be invited to be part of this conversation today, and I'm joining you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And this land is now otherwise known as Burnaby. My personal description is I'm a white woman. I also wear glasses. My hair is tinted blue, and I'm wearing a navy blue shirt and a tan colored sweater. My artificial background is bookshelves filled with books. So I'm also just digesting Professor Jantz's presentation. It resonates so much with the work that I do. I am an associate professor of nursing at the University of British Columbia, and I do research with people with intellectual disabilities about their healthcare experiences. I'm also the main caregiver for my daughter, who is a disabled 19-year-old woman who is medically complex. And what that means is she spends a lot of time in the hospital. And as a parent, I'm utterly terrified that she is transitioning from pediatric healthcare to the adult healthcare system. And like Heidi, I kind of bring an invisible card with me, and I'm quite sure it's on her chart. This mother is a nurse and she's a professor. And the leveraging of privilege that I see in my own life in comparison to others is profound to me. And how she, Eleanor, my daughter, receives differential care based on who I am. But it's still just soaked in medical ableism. And I just was going to share a couple of our experiences as well. And this is in the pediatric system. And I think the point I wanted to bring forward was this isn't something that begins in the adult system. This persists all through our healthcare system. And so Eleanor has had many surgeries due to spinal issues. And when she was about 10, she had a surgery, and she always gets a hypoactive delirium following surgery, which means that certain factors cause her to go to sleep. And the ultimate end of a hypoactive delirium is if those factors aren't addressed, you will die. You'll go into a coma and you won't ever wake up. And one of her issues is poor pain management. And so when I talked to the physician about the fact that her pain wasn't being well managed because she has ongoing complex chronic pain, the doctor said to me, I'm not going to change it or give her more because people with developmental disabilities don't feel pain in the same way that regular people do. So I have spent 19 years advocating for pain management for her. This is a very typical perspective among physicians and nurses. It's something that research has developed an evidence base around. And so people in the medical profession, some of them, not all, but some who control the pain meds are very secure in their knowledge that Eleanor is not going to feel as much pain as another 10-year-old. So that, you know, for me, if I wasn't there to intervene and didn't understand her history and wasn't a nurse who could speak that language, she would just fall asleep. And many nurses would say to me, well, she's just sleeping. And, you know, thinking because she has intellectual disabilities, when she couldn't tell them the day of the week, well, that's just normal. Well, it's not normal. Eleanor knows the day of the week. So this constant vigilance to be there. And then in another situation, when she was 12 and we were living in an inpatient acute rehab facility, she went into respiratory arrest, for which they needed to call an ambulance and start a code. And when the doctor who was present in that facility came into the room, she walked into the room and looked at Eleanor, and Eleanor has some facial differences because of her genetic differences. She put her hands up and said, before I do anything, I need to know, is she a code? And this is on a 12-year-old child. Well, what 12-year-old child who's not in hospice care shouldn't be a code? And so she prolonged the period that Eleanor was in respiratory arrest by not starting what she should have started as an intervention. And had I not been there, because I was sleeping there at night, the nurses might have said, oh, I need to check the chart or whatever, but I was able to say, yes, absolutely. So I share these examples because Professor Jance's experiences resonated so much with me, and I'm sure with others. And I just, you know, want people to appreciate that this starts from the very beginning, and it is well embedded into the health professions and goes into the education of many healthcare professionals and the total absence of disability education in our health profession programs. So I'll pause there. And I realized I didn't say what I would spray paint on Parliament because I can't think of anything because I'm not able to think in succinct ways, but I just, what I've heard so far is amazing. So I'm just gonna, you know, dwell with those a bit. And I just appreciate so much that this conversation is happening and we have the opportunity, because I think so many people are so unaware of what happens, so completely ignorant of what is happening in relation to medical ableism. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing those moments. And thank you as well to your daughter. Yeah, it's a pretty heavy topic, and there's a lot of I appreciate you bringing the experience, the firsthand experience of these things. They don't start when we become adults. They're there from the beginning, and they're ingrained in the systems that we're accessing. It's very important to sit with. Next, we will go to Serena Baines. if you would like to share with us the territory that you're coming from, and a brief visual description, and what you would spray paint on Parliament, and then any thoughts you have on Heidi's comments from earlier.
Thank you, Q. Hi, everyone. My name is Serena, pronounced they, she, and thank you so much for having me. I am, of course, disabled, queer, trans femme, and I am currently located on the unceded Coast Salish territories of the Coquitlam, Catesy, Tsawwassen, Stolo, Wassainik, and Kwantlen nations, which is colonially known as Surrey. And for a visual description, I'm Punjabi. I have pale skin and black hair that's pulled back into a bun. I'm wearing headphones and I have a gray hoodie on and an orange wall behind me. And what I would spray paint on Parliament is, I can't wait until you're disabled. I think a lot of able-bodied folks have so much ableism and that kind of thing intertwined in them that they can't see themselves as disabled folks, even though a lot of us will become disabled in our lifetimes. And I know it would just stir up feelings in them. So it makes me happy to think that they would go through that. And thoughts on Heidi's statement. I was thinking about Heidi's statement while everyone was speaking, and it made me realize how close we are historically to like the original purpose of like these institutions, like medical institutions, you know, like removing disabled folks from the public sphere and moving them into the private sphere. And, you know, that can be done in a lot of ways, whether it's deciding who receives care or not, and thus like potentially like extending their stay in an institution, or deciding who lives or not and then permanently removing them from the public sphere, or in my experience, you know, removing folks' belonging and like ability to have visitors, and thus like removing any interaction that you could possibly have with the public sphere, and like isolating people just to this institution where they constantly experience medical ableism. It just made me reflect and realize that there hasn't been a lot of progress in the medical model of disability. Yeah, and I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you again.
Thank you, Serena. Yeah, what you said about how close we are to the original purpose of these institutions, I think that's a very apt and like cutting way to put it. And I really appreciate that for sure. Yeah, some excellent thoughts. I am fighting through my own brain fog here, folks. We just have a few more panelists to introduce here. Our next person is Kaylee Kubik. And Kaylee, if you could introduce yourself to us and share some thoughts on the matter as well. Let me know if you want me to repeat the prompts as well.
I'm in Belleville, Ontario, coming from the traditional and unceded territories of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and Haudenosaunee people, as well as I'm just a few miles west of Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. I'm sitting on my balcony right now. It's a sunny day and there's a little bit of shadow on my face. I am a middle-aged woman with long brown hair with some nice silver streaks. I'm wearing a black shirt with a yellow light bulb on it, and behind me is just a white paneled wall. I thought of a couple things when Heidi was talking. Just, I think in general, hospitals are not the safe place that a lot of people think they are. But COVID really amplified that in a lot of ways. I know that a lot of people, if anybody's been on Twitter, have just talked about how much healthcare they have not gotten because of COVID. And not even the hospital being safe because people aren't wearing N95s, for instance. I just, sorry, I have brain fog as well. I just think if our hospitals can't even be made safe in the middle of a pandemic, we're in real trouble. And now that a lot of provinces are removing mask mandates, how many people are not going to go at all? That kind of scares me. I was also thinking about what Jennifer said, and something that personally affects me is being a chronic pain patient. Automatically puts you in a category that makes you not worthy of any healthcare almost. I happen to be white and straight. So there's not as many things that automatically discriminate me as somebody in pain. But as somebody who has mental illness, somebody who has had childhood abuse, for which doctors seem to think that you should have to account for what exactly happened to you sometimes, which is traumatic and unnecessary. There's a lot of various different reasons that people can't get healthcare, and medical ableism from one end to the other. Particularly now that denying people pain medication has been codified into regulations. It just makes going to the hospital traumatic, because if you're in pain, you're hoping for help. And I think as far as the MAID conversation goes, as we move away from treating pain altogether, I think it's going to be a reason for a lot of people, for that reason alone, for that reason alone, to pick MAID.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Kaylee, for bringing those insights and those thoughts and connections. Connecting MAID to opioid regulations and in general the drug war, really, and all of the ableism and racism and colonial violence that comes with is very important. Thank you for that. Our next panelist is John Neary, Dr. John Neary. If you could introduce yourself for us and offer any thoughts that you have on Heidi's previous comments, that would be great.
Thanks, Q. So my name's John Neary. I'm a physician practicing general internal medicine on the territory of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, and Mississauga Nations and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, now also known as Hamilton, Ontario. This part of Ontario, people don't, I think, always say unceded as much because there's this idea that the land was ceded. Although what I said I would spray paint on Parliament Hill is that structural coercion isn't informed consent. So I think that also applies to the history of the land. I lost, oh, and sorry, I think I can still say early middle-aged man wearing glasses with brown hair and a still mostly brown beard and an orange t-shirt in front of a fairly dull white background. I lost track of my thoughts hearing each of the other panelists because each panelist who spoke, I tried to update my running list of points. And I'm just getting over COVID-19, so I think my mental stack is not as, can't hold as many things as it usually does. So this may be a bit disorganized. What Jennifer, so I think I'm mostly going to respond to Heidi obliquely by responding to what some of the other panelists said. Jennifer and Serena's statements, among others, really resonated with me. Jennifer's daughter lived in my community and came to hospital next week. I'd be the physician admitting her. And everything Jennifer said about the healthcare system in general, but specifically the adult healthcare system, checks out from my perspective. I have a friend who likes to say that we learn about the values of an organization not from its mission statement, but from its budget. And when you look at where we spend our money in healthcare, it's quite clear that as a society, we really don't care very much about adults compared to children, and specifically about disabled adults or adults with disabilities compared to abled adults. You know, whatever we say, that comes out in how we use our resources. I was thinking about the pandemic, both when when I heard Heidi's statement and I listened to Serena, and you know, there were lots of things done during the pandemic that purported to value the lives of disabled people and elderly people. You know, things like banning pretty much all visitors from long-term care facilities and other institutions, you know, for months or a year or more. But when you unpack those policies, they don't really check out, because at the same time that, you know, essential, I mean, even the word visitors makes it sound elective, but at the same time that, you know, essential non-employed people were banned from these facilities, governments, at least in Ontario, still permitted facilities to rely on precarious temp labor with people working at multiple different facilities and spreading COVID from one to another. And the only reason for that was that it would have, you know, cost slightly more money to require the facilities to hire people on permanent staff with job security, you know, and pay them, you know, actual wages and not temp wages. You know, so I think you know, a lot of what was framed as caring about people's lives was much more an exercise in sort of damage control and, you know, crisis management. And when you looked at the whole matrix of decisions, you know, it wasn't actually about protecting life. Now, I think I'm on this panel for an odd reason. I don't even think I can really give a content warning here without giving away the plot, but I think I'm here because as a physician practicing acute care general internal medicine, I have from time to time taken care of people, or if you you might whatever phrase you'd want to use, at least been most also physician for people who've considered MAID or have asked for MAID. I don't provide MAID, but I've made referrals and at times when people have asked for it. I've been around people who've had it. And I've had very conflicted feelings on that, but that was before Bill C-7. I think before Bill C-7, it ought to have been clear to people, maybe it wasn't as clear to me as it should have been, but it ought to have been clear to people that there was no realistic way that, even in some abstract way, even in some abstract world, you could, have access to this procedure, without structural coercion. That was never going to happen in Canada. I think it took a lot of people too long to figure that out, and I was among them, maybe not as late as many. But I can't get into specifics, but certainly both in terms of cases I've read about and cases I've known of, the structural coercion is obviously present, and it's not specific to MAID. I mean, there's a notion that structural coercion, MAID is a singular thing where there will be structural coercion, and whereas everything else in the healthcare system is working just fine. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. There's structural coercion all over the place in healthcare. And of course, that was also going to be the case with MAID. And that doesn't, require individual healthcare professionals, overtly, pressuring people into MAID, although, there have been at least a few of those, like shocking cases, but the vast majority of it isn't overt like that. It's just people don't have good options. And the recent death of a person with multiple chemical sensitivity who couldn't get decent access to housing, I think is a foremost example. And I think I've spoken too long, so I'll leave it there.
Appreciate the insights that we're getting on this panel. People who, like yourself, see it from a different perspective, or are coming to it from a different avenue than others. It's part of what I appreciate about the filibuster in general, is bringing these different thoughts and experiences to the table. Thank you, John. So next we have Rabbit Richards. Just gonna say I have a special soft spot for Rabbit in everything I do, and I just need to make that clear every time I'm doing anything. But Rabbit, if you want to introduce us to the territory you're on, your brief visual description, your spray paint slogan, and thoughts you have on this very rich discussion on medical ableism started by Heidi's comments. Please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I am reading from a paper in front of me because my brain is made of a lot of glass shards that shake around in a bowl and make no sense. I am today on unceded Coast Salish territory, acknowledging specifically the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Kwantlen in what is now known as Vancouver. And there are people who claim me in Tiohtià:ke, which is Kanien'kehá:ka territory in Montreal, and in Lenni Lenape territory, which is in New York. My name is Rabbit, and I use they, them pronouns. I am a cute, fat, Black person wearing gray in a white room, using my headphones as a hairband because life is hard. And the strange green shape behind my head is just a piece of cloth that's wrapped around my chair. The thing that I would like to spray paint on Parliament is land back. I am coming from the States and moving to Canada is interesting. You don't get to shed any of the old things, you just get more layers of different flavors of the exact same thing. And I think, first of all, I don't think that I trust anyone at Parliament to handle anything more complicated than land back. And secondly, I think that the way that systems overlap each other and create further and greater disabling events, it just seems like we get pigeonholed a lot. I don't know if that's the right term. We get restricted in our scale of, in our scope, restricted in our scope about which things apply to which topics. So I think they should just give it back, and then we can, you know, and it doesn't mean that every system that predated colonialism was the right system, even for the land that it was on. But this colonial stamp is just so incredibly dangerous and lethal, and its place within, like, the medical system and the legal system and the enforcement system, the way that those things come together is making it harder and harder for anyone to just live their life. Like, I just want to, like, plant vegetables and feed my friends. And occasionally when I feel worse than usual, I want someone to go to who maybe knows a little bit more than me and had the ability to spend more time in school and could know something about what might make me feel better. And that's definitely the system that able people think we have. And with regard to Professor Dance's presentation, the thing that I wrote down for myself to say is that I hate how clearly disabled folks heard every section of that statement and knew immediately what it meant for probabilities of care, for attachments in community, for the wreckage of your life that's left when everyone else decides that an emergency is a big enough emergency to disrupt your life without caring what they leave behind. Like, there's just so many pieces that we immediately go, oh no, about, and that abled professionals don't go, oh no, until the end, because they can't foresee a system treating us so badly or being marginalized in enough ways to literally sweep us out of life. Yeah, that's enough of that. Thanks, Q.
Thanks, Rabbit. Bringing everything back to land back is so important. You know, we've had wonderful thoughts on structural coercion, the drug war, the ways that all of this is systemic, and it's built like this, I think, is really what so many, like, I think all of us, all of you have said that in some form, is these systems are built this way. This isn't a mistake or a misstep or a wrong turn. It is an exposure more than anything. I want to introduce Gabrielle G, the co-producer, along with Catherine, director of many of these sessions. I would say in some ways, the casting director, doing some excellent work on who comes onto these panels and shedding light on voices that may be heard or heard less often. As Gabrielle has said to me, many of us, if not most of us, are quite familiar with some of her personal experiences of medical ableism as a disabled, poor, fat woman. So she's offered us a reading for me to share with you in lieu of personal experiences. And this reading that I am just scrolling through my email for, because I thought I opened it up and I did not. This reading is kind of intended to ground us in the political nature of our experiences. Well, I'll just get into it because I have pulled it up now. And yeah, here's what Gabrielle wanted to share with us today. She says, I'm going to use my time to read an excerpt from an interview with James Davies, author of multiple books on psychiatry and our society. This particular interview is about his book, Sedated: How Modern Capitalism Created Our Mental Health Crisis. This interview was conducted by Mad in America and can be found on their blog under the title, The Politics of Distress, a discussion with Dr. James Davies on his new book, Sedated. Davies begins by identifying neoliberalism, particularly as it has taken hold of US, UK, Canada, and elsewhere since the 1980s, as having replaced what he calls a more socialist-like style of capitalism. While it obviously was never socialist, he identifies a market shift that altered society in many significant ways. It did this by greatly expanding the dominance and reach of the market through tax cuts, mostly for the wealthy, by empowering multinationals via wide deregulation, cutting red tape, and by dramatically reducing the state's role in the economy through privatization and cuts to labor, welfare, and social protections. Davies also notes that it introduced a sort of new individualism. Again, not that individualism was new to capitalism. This ideology heavily emphasized and spread the belief that success is an outcome of exceptional individual qualities rather than exceptional social privileges and advantages, and failure as rooted in personal deficits rather than in lack of opportunity, equality, or social support. In short, neoliberalism at its purest cast the individual as entirely responsible for his or her own destiny, their own destiny. The person you were had little to do with the circumstances in which you were raised, just as the good life was mostly achieved through heroic feats of individual effort, rather than mostly achieved through collective action, togetherness, and support. Davies argues that the mental health system, for various reasons, has been particularly adept at adapting to the culture and demands of neoliberalism. He explains that he is not suggesting this collusion has happened in any kind of conspirational or calculated way, but that it's been a consequence of the mental health sector struggling to survive under this new set of neoliberal economic arrangements. Here are 4 ways Davies suggests this has happened, and I think we can extend our thoughts on these to all healthcare and more generally to medical ableism and MAID overall. Firstly, our sector has depoliticized suffering, conceptualizing suffering in ways that protect the current economy from criticism, i.e. reframing suffering as rooted in individual rather than social causes, thus favoring self over social and economic reform. Secondly, it has privatized suffering, redefining individual mental health in terms consistent with the goals of the economy. Here, health is characterized as comprising those feelings, values, and behaviors, e.g. personal ambition, industriousness, and positivity, that serve economic growth, increased productivity, and cultural conformity, irrespective of whether they are actually good for the individual and the community. Thirdly, it has widely pathologized suffering, turning behaviors and feelings deemed inconvenient from the standpoint of certain authorities, i.e. things that perturb and disturb the established order, into pathologies that require medical framing and intervention. Fourthly, it has commodified suffering, transfiguring suffering into a vibrant market opportunity, making it highly lucrative to big business as it manufactures its so-called solutions from which increased tax revenues, profits, and higher share value can be extracted. And finally, it has decollectivized suffering, dispersing our socially caused suffering into different self-residing dysfunctions, thereby diminishing the shared and collective experiences that have so often in the past been a vital spur for social change. G asks that panelists offer your reflections on this in the context of medical ableism and MAID. Before we get into that, I am going to, G had what she would spray paint on Parliament as well. And I don't have it at the moment, and I'm just going to find it. I pulled up all of my things and then, you know, closed a tab that I needed instead of one that I didn't, apparently. So this gives us a moment to kind of sit with what Gabrielle shared with us. She actually just messaged me with her spray paint tag. She said, Social Murder Incorporated, National Headquarters. Yes, absolutely, that is the Parliament. Would panelists like to offer some thoughts on G's comments? I think there are some really strong statements in her comments, obviously, on the nature of suffering under neoliberalism, this current capitalist framework that we live in. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I am mindful of our time. And so I'm going to say names, and if you don't have any thoughts to offer at this time, then that's absolutely fine. And you can just say pass or not right now, or come back to me. So if we could start again with Lucia, as I said, any thoughts you have, if you want to come back, whatever works for you.
For sure. I think that I guess what I've been thinking about is how the privatization of suffering gives us like sort of two options. Like it's really interesting for me that the privatization of suffering has often said to disabled folks, well, there's nothing that we can do for you. So your only option is despair. Like there's nothing that we can do for your suffering. That suffering is never put into a context of there might be other people like you who are suffering, and sort of the critical mass, like how many people does it take before we're actually going to offer sort of care and options to people. But I think a really perverse aspect of the privatization of suffering is how disabled folks are, the option that we're given is often like being really hopeful, like just hope that it'll get better. It'll just take time. And I think that's sort of the way that wellness culture creeps into care for disabled folks. My own medical practice, it was a doctor's office, and now the owners have made it into like a wellness clinic, which caters, like it so caters explicitly, even in the design of the waiting room, it is for abled people who are not, who are there to get maybe occasional health care, but who certainly are never going to be able to be it's very clear that it's not for disabled folks. Like my doctor's office is not for disabled folks. Not that I think that doctor's offices by default are either, but I mean the way that wellness culture has crept into healthcare and has erased disabled folks' experiences of not getting better. And not getting better, but still having needs and desires and the right to care. And so I think that, yeah, I guess it just makes me think a lot about, you know, when I go into a hospital, even a hospital and ER, when I'm surrounded by other folks who are, even for that moment, maybe not in the entirety of their lives needing care, it is still so isolating. And I think that's the strangeness of it, that you can go into a busy, packed ER and have there's no framework to say, like, we're all suffering together right now. And so, yeah, I guess I've just been thinking about how isolating it can be, even when you're in those sort of collective experiences, because the politics of suffering and the politics of disability is not named explicitly in those spaces. Because if we were all, you know, if there was a mechanism by which we could all in an ER, like, be like, it's really not okay that we don't have proper PPE right here. Like, all of us are not okay right now. So yeah, those are sort of my provisional thoughts at the moment. Just how really lonely of an experience it is. And that it worries me, especially in terms of just the loneliness of being coerced into MAID under these conditions, to not even be presented with the option to say, like, hey, like, you know, like, you're not yeah, I just think about the incredible loneliness of that experience. And so when I hear stories in the media, I think about how just the sort of the desperate loneliness that I sort of that I experience and that I perceive, and that hope is not a more palatable, hope is not a replacement for actual care, that it is also a kind of abandonment as well. When it's not undergirded, when it's not supported by actual policy and actual dignity. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, hope as not a replacement for care. Awesome. Everyone, I'm just going to insert this here. Everyone kind of asked if you wanted to bring any questions to the table, and as co-host, just mindful of our time. So Lucia and future, like the rest of the panelists as we are speaking, if you would like to share the question that you brought to the table, if you want people to respond to it directly as they're responding to Gabrielle's comments, you are welcome to share your question or questions with the group now, and people can respond to things as their mind is wont to do, perhaps. Catherine, I noticed you unmuted yourself. Did you have something to add?
I did. I just wanted to flag that I noticed Asiya Hussein has joined us, and as I recall, they have just until 1:30, so maybe in our go round, I think they've been
Go to Asiya next.
listening to us. So could we go to them next? Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm going to give Lucia one moment. If you would like to share your questions, there's no obligation, but if you would like people to respond to that, you are welcome to do so now.
It's just, I guess it's sort of a question about, like, what are the practical ways that we can register what we do want and what we don't want, sort of like in our, I'm thinking about charting procedures, and they say, like, patient denies X, right? But there's never a way, no, sort of to, like, make it clear, sort of the breadcrumbs of what we do want. And so what are the practical strategies to, like, like sort of beyond a DNR, like what are other practical strategies to sort of register like our demands in a lot of cases. Yeah.
Totally. Awesome. With that, I think that's an excellent suggestion, Catherine, that we go to Asia. If you want to share some thoughts on Gabrielle's comments, on medical ableism, on Lucia's questions there, what are the practical ways that we can register our desires and needs and demands, you're welcome to step into this space now if you would like. Or on your own situation, obviously, for sure. Your own experiences, sorry.
Ani Kinagoya, thank you for having me. Asia and Dishnagas and Donjaba Toronto. My name's Asia from Toronto. And that was a really good question, Lucia. I think, well, first of all, my thoughts at this point on what everyone has shared is just deeply reflecting and feeling how relatable and how it can resonate with so many of us. In my case, I am a survivor of medical ableism, racism, misogyny, xenophobia in healthcare and in everyday life. I had various forms of disabilities prior to, but my normal now, a lot of why I have so many profound disabilities is because I survived what Joyce Echaquan, Dr. Susan Moore, and Michael Hickson did not, were murdered by this injustice. And, you know, my personal experience is a testimony of what happens if we don't dismantle this oppression. And, you know, that question, how do we get our wants, our needs, our rights recorded? It's hard because, I mean, Lucia mentioned, like, what if you have a healthcare professional who's saying, you know, patient denies such and such or whatever. There have been some really good recommendations that I found actually work, depending on where you are in Canada, in the world, and in the medical system in which you reside and are colonized from. One way is to, and if there's something that's actually incorrect as well, is to submit a written inclusion into your chart of the truth. And if something is being denied to you, depending on how safe you are to do so, to ask, okay, can you please record in the chart that what I've requested is being denied? And so a healthcare professional, you know, I love healthcare heroes. I've had really good experiences and, as you've just heard, deadly experiences. And so when someone who is coming to this profession with compassion, or at least thinking about liability, when the thought comes to them of having to record that they've denied something that is requested and that is actually justified, it becomes a moment to step back or wheel back and reflect, okay, well, why is it that I'm denying this? But oftentimes when you're in a moment, in my case, of a potentially fatal moment, or if you're in the ER, or if you're being legislated to be forced into medical coercion and dying because we're being denied what we require to live, or if we are the first in line for COVID triage. It's very difficult when you're in that situation to advocate for yourself. You know, in my case, I'm about to have to put on my lung machine for over 18 hours a day and have a tiny window of being able to speak. And so pre-pandemic, having someone with you is so important, who can advocate for you. And if you're a racialized woman like myself, I hate to say this, but it's the truth. When there's a white man who's accompanying you, it's when we are safer. Sickening, but it's the truth. And I think you asked about my lived experience as well, and Gabrielle had asked me to share an update on my situation. Some of you may recognize my face as for those who need a description like myself as well, a brown hijabi woman sitting in front of a Palestini Masri drum on a wall. I have an orange-brown shirt and a blue hijab in the patterns of water. You may recognize my face also as being in the news since November and onwards, of being the face of what happens if medical ableism and colonial capitalism becomes a barrier in what we need to thrive and live. A life-dependent, life-saving lung medication that keeps me alive and many others, and which is needed for all of us in this pandemic, and with the climate disaster that is saving lives and helping us thrive, was price gouged at almost 500% with no alternative, and was then removed from coverage, which became a death sentence for all of us who need this, and for anyone who hopes to heal from long COVID, or even COVID itself. It's a mast cell stabilizer, so it stabilizes our cells from any potential exposure from any kind of mast cell activation, which is at the root of many illnesses. It was, they say it takes a village, but it took a world of advocacy from all around the world to take on Pharaoh and Pharma, if I can call it that, and advocate for the reversal of the price gouge and to return it to full coverage across Canada and across the world. And it took a lot of effort, and after several months, the sole manufacturer agreed to reverse the price gouge for the remaining stock, which unfortunately they actually have decided to no longer make this medication, and there is absolutely no alternative. And despite it being reversed in the exorbitant price increase, many governments across Canada, provincial, have refused to return it to formulary coverage. So whatever small time we have left, we cannot afford it. And once it is no longer in production, it is again a death sentence. We have found one manufacturer to that has been making it as in another country. However, it's extremely more expensive than the price gouge itself, which again is a death sentence. And I should add that there are many layers of intersections of oppression in regards to this nebulized cromolyn. It's called cromolyn. And you can follow the story from the hashtags bring cromolyn back and hashtag help us breathe. This medication was derived from my maternal ancestral indigenous healing medicines, appropriated and stolen by colonial capitalism, denied for us, and it was meant to be shared for healing for our shared planet. So that's my update, and bringing in some intersections of what the reality is how not only are we experiencing medical ableism, but we're also experiencing overt genocide.
Mhm.
And you know what it means to have the disability filibuster and its importance in our daring to exist in a world denying us existence, in daring to demand justice and healing and what ableds are privileged to experience every day. Thank you so much, Shukran. I'll pass the mic back to the next person.
Thank you, Asya. Holding that grief and that pain in crypt space is really important. And thank you. We will hear from Jennifer if you want to share some reflections on Gabrielle's words, on Asya's words, on Lucia's words. You're most welcome to at this time.
Thank you. It's really hard to follow Asya. I think we all need 5 minutes to just dwell with what they have shared, but I know we have a timeline, so I'll pick it up. And I was reflecting on Gabrielle's comments as well, and something that John had said about looking at the issues of capitalism and neoliberalism beyond even the healthcare space. And so one of the things that really struck me in the recent federal budget in Canada was that the only funding towards disability supports was through an employment program. And it's a fairly narrow employment program. And I think that just reflects so much at that sort of philosophical level around the valuing of people and bodies, that if you can work and produce, you have value, and if you can't, you don't. And so there are all of these myriad of ways in which overtly and covertly disabled people are dying in ways that abled people are not. And one of the ways, one of the big ways that we see in research is through cancer screening, and that many disabled people do not get referred for cancer screening for reasons, lots of reasons, all of them rooted in medical ableism, and then how screening spaces are built and accessible or not, and even ideas about people, healthcare providers projecting how they think someone will do in cancer care without ever actually talking to that person about it, or actually offering them the opportunity for screening or treatment. So I think that it's one of those situations where things are very much baked in at this point, and how we change that is through conversations like this. And also, even though it makes ourselves vulnerable, making our stories public. So even though my daughter doesn't appear with me because that's her choice, she's given me permission to share her experiences and our shared experiences, because it does, in a small way, I think, help people understand that it can happen to this white privileged family. And that, I think, shifts sometimes for some people their thinking. My question that I had posed was, what role does medical ableism have in making MAID available to disabled people acceptable to the general public? And I just wanted to share one other situation that's unfolding right now in British Columbia and just draw everyone's attention to it. And that is the death of Florence Gerard, who was a woman with Down syndrome in her 50s who starved to death in her home. She lost weight over the course of a year, and her live-in caregiver never sought any medical attention for her. And that medical caregiver, that unpaid caregiver, is now before the courts in a case of criminal negligence. And for me, the shocking part is you had a person starving to death in your home for a year, and the charge is criminal negligence. And that is so reflective of what was the value of Florence's life and how it was perceived socially, that a person can starve to death over the course of a year and no one in their social or professional network notices enough to actually seek medical assistance. So I think that there are many of these situations and experiences to cause outrage. And for me, medical ableism makes MAID possible because we already see such a devaluing of disabled people and disabled lives. That is sort of the natural next step to move from not just denying care, but actually providing a medical intervention, or what's called a medical intervention, so that people die more quickly and are no longer a burden on the system. And the system not just being healthcare, but the system being our welfare systems, our social systems, all of the systems of care that we have and that we need in order to continue to live and to, you know, have housing and have food and all of those sorts of things. So I just want to thank everybody for their comments today. It's been really powerful for me, and I know I'll be thinking a lot about what is being said and shared here.
Thank you, Jennifer. From here, we're going to hear from Serena. If you wanted to share some thoughts on the discussion so far. And I also want to give a very brief shout out to my good friend Sunny, who has been a whirlwind on the social media, and I just want to appreciate them very, very much for tweeting out quotes and keeping people updated if they're unable to tune in today. Yeah, Serena, if you want to offer some thoughts on what has been shared thus far, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Q. Yeah, I was just reflecting on everyone's comments and about neoliberalism and capitalism and how it intersects with, you know, disability and MAID. And I think what I've noticed the most, you know, I got started in disability activism, disability justice through co-founding the SFU Disability and Neurodiversity Alliance at Simon Fraser University. And I very quickly realized how individualism and capitalism has created, or decided rather, that certain conditions are not disabling, because that would create too much of a problem for the state and too much solidarity built between each other. And I don't know how many folks I've talked to where they've said, you know, I didn't know depression, anxiety, ADHD, you know, all these things that students most often are struggling with. I didn't know this counted as like a disability. I didn't know I could join this community. I thought, you know, my doctor told me to conduct self-care, go to the gym and exercise, meditate, you know, make sure you take a shower every day. And, you know, that's basically it. You know, you can take some medication to what a lot of students have described as becoming numb to your suffering, and, becoming numb to the suffering of others. And I think a lot of those, a lot of the feedback that folks get from medical professionals is coercive in that it silos them into a community of able-bodied folks where they won't receive that solidarity, that community, or that care. And then you have this disconnection and you feel that like options for your treatment or like a better quality of life aren't available to you, and that maybe there isn't other options available. And I've been thinking a lot about that, about how imagine if like everyone who had experienced depression in like any kind of way that affected them on their day-to-day life had identified as disabled for that time, what kind of impact that would have on society, and how a lot of the folks that are seen as productive would be able to come to terms with the conditions that we as people who are seen as more disabled live with and live under. And that's something I experienced myself. Is I had gone had a brief stint at the psych ward a few years ago, and I got out and I wanted to register as someone who was disabled at my university. And I remember going to the psychiatrist and they were like speaking to his assistant. It was like, oh, she wants to like, she's like looking for like she wants us to sign off on like being disabled. I was like, what does that mean? But it took me a few attempts, and every time I was trying to folks would try to talk me out of it. You know what I mean? You can live a fulfilling life. You just been non-compliant with treatment. If you take these medications and you do this and you do that, you don't need to be disabled. And it's a lot of self-advocacy and work that has to go in. And I guess in this specific context, I was lucky that I also had the more stigmatizing diagnosis of borderline personality, where people were more likely to see that as disabling, and provide me the ability to register and identify as such. And I think it speaks a lot to how capitalism even puts a hierarchy on disability, and like these disabilities are the most productive, and these are the folks that we can live with. These are the folks that we have to get rid of. But yeah, I think I'll leave it off at that.
Thank you. Yeah, really great insights on that individualization and that the lack of solidarity benefits the systems that we could all be working towards undermining if we understand and embody the political nature of our experiences. Thank you for that, Serena. We may not have time to to get through all of our thoughts. I want to hear from Kaylee, but just giving a heads up that that Rabbit and John, we may not have an opportunity to hear from you further because we are coming up on time, and we do want to have a moment of silence and reflection. So yeah, I just want to note that for both of your sakes. But Kaylee, I would love to hear from you, your thoughts on the discussion thus far, anything that's struck a nerve for you, your own experiences or questions that you wanted to kind of have an opportunity to address yourself.
I forgot to say that I would spray that MAID is predatory and monstrous, not mercy. And probably a big content warning here. I feel a little bit hypocritical in this space because I have started conversations with my doctor about MAID. And I don't think I'm going to be here next year. And so I oppose the expansion of MAID. Death is not my first, second, or 17th choice. But I have been beat down. As I talked about earlier, I have chronic pain. And in 2020, my doctor cut my payments. And 2.5 years later, through a lot of long nights, I can't even get basic health care anymore. And so on a purely medical front, because I have a history of mental illness, because I have a history of trauma, and the drug policies are such as they are, it is assumed that none of my pain is real. Or if it is real, I'm too high risk because apparently if you have a broken heart or mental illness, you also can't have physical problems. Though to be clear, I probably have, actually I do have some of those physical problems. Sorry, I'm on a balcony.
No apology needed. Thank you.
Some of those, some of my medical problems are direct or indirect result. From what Gabrielle was mentioning, the whole individual bit, I have found it a little bit hard to sit in these doctor's appointments because I know that the way that I'm being treated in many ways is not about me. But it is hard to separate. And if I wasn't me and I didn't all know that, all I would hear, and I do hear, is it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. And when you combine that with poverty and in a pandemic where we've been told only they will die all day, every day, whether it's in policy or direct messaging, it beats you down. And a few weeks ago, I wrote about the fact that I think this MAID law has put, like, I call it my MAID monkey. I have a monkey on my back because many years ago, I had severe PTSD. I was regularly suicidal. I had been hospitalized, and had MAID been available then, I would already be dead. But I pushed through and I healed and I did a lot of hard work. And I just lost my thought. So I've had an internal disposition, and I think humans in general do. When you're facing obstacles, you push through and you look for solutions, and you have doctors and therapists telling you to keep going and all this kind of stuff. But now I'm being told, okay, too much for you, here you go. I'm not going to give you medication. I'm no longer going to treat your medical conditions. I'm not going to give you the resources to afford all of the non-pharmaceutical therapies that you tell me is the only thing that's available to me now. And the only thing you're going to give me is a lethal injection. The presence of that law has changed everything for me. And sorry.
Take your time. That structural abandonment, that is its own form of structural coercion.
Sorry.
I'm going to echo what Rabbit said in the chat. Rabbit said, we have so much room for you here. And thank you for sharing this. The vulnerable and painful parts of this. The reality that a lot of us can relate to. That monkey on your back. I really relate to that in a very strong way. And I really appreciate, I read your words on it on Twitter, and I'm grateful to be in the room with you now. And I'm just appalled that you're in this position, that so many of us are put in these positions, and absolutely poverty and the isolation makes it so much worse.
I think the last thing I'll say is that, and I would love to know the story and the everything about the 200 people who chose to use MAID last year since the law has been introduced. But I don't expect my pain to go away. I don't think my illnesses and my disabilities are just, it's not even the issue. It's not even the issue. And just that my situation has lots and lots of remedies.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. The lack of choice is absolutely intentional, and it's not, it should not be the only option you have left to turn to. Gabrielle kindly prompted me. Thank you, G. Please do read the chat if you're able to. There is so much care and support for you in this space. Your experiences, as John said, as others are doubtless thinking, your experiences don't make you hypocritical in this space whatsoever. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think this is actually a very opportune time to take a moment of reflection and silence. I actually don't want to share. I will be involved with the filibuster for many opportunities. I want to sit with Kaylee's experiences, with Asia's experiences, with all of our experiences in this space, and think of the people who, as Kaylee said, chose, made in the past year and before that. So if we can take that time now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Q, for creating this kind of space for equipped kinship, for safety, for truth. Thank you, all of you, every one of you, for bringing what you have brought into that space, courage and generosity, and the fight. I want to say just two things before we close. One is that the Legislative Committee, if you are following their work, they meet on Monday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern for 3 hours. They really could defer that meeting and sit quietly for 2 hours and hear this testimony. That's all they need to do. But in case they don't do that, we are back next, or this coming Friday. That would be April the 29th. I'm pretty sure if somebody fact check for me, because I'm bad.
You are correct, 29.
Thank you. We're back on April 29th. It will be a little later in the day. Watch our Twitter feed or our website. Go to our website at least by tomorrow, possibly later today. The recording of this broadcast will be available there anytime. If you have people who should have been here who couldn't have been here with us.
Mm-hmm.
And in case Parliament wasn't listening, we're going to do medical ableism part 2 on Friday, because this is too important not to be heard. Thank you all.
Before we leave, I know that we're just at our time, but we would like, if each panelist wants to share one word that you want to carry through the week, that you want people to reflect on, any word, one word for us all to leave on. We'll start again. I'll share a word so that, Lucia, you have an opportunity to think for once. You're not on the spot immediately. I'd like to share just hope and grief. It's 2 words. I'm a co-host, I get to cheat. Hope and grief, if we can all sit in and with that this week. Lucia, a word that you would like to share for the week for people to carry forward?
My word is solidarity. Absolutely.
Thank you. We'll go to Jennifer, a word that you would like to share.
My word is bereft.
Bereft. Thank you. Serena, a word.
My word is community.
Community. Thank you. Kaylee, if you would like to share a word.
Broken.
Broken. Gabrielle shares consent. Asia, if putting it in the chat is accessible to you at this time, you're welcome to do that as well. Finger spelling.
Finger spelling the word worth or worthy.
Worthy. Thank you. Rabbit, a word.
Accountability.
Accountability. Thank you. John.
Lucy had check mine, so I'll go with coercion.
Coercion and an echoing of solidarity. And Catherine, if you would like to share a word as well.
Listen
Listen.
to us.
Yes.
We're
Thank you,
not
everyone.
trolling. We're
Yeah.
not trolls. We're members of your family. Listen to us.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. See you on Friday.
Thanks for being in this space, everyone. I think we've stopped live streaming at least. But yeah, just a final thank you, and very big appreciation for the vulnerability and, as Catherine put it, generosity of this space. I'm always honored to be in CRIP space and disability filibuster space with everyone. I'm going to take my leave, and oh, I think I'm just getting a message from Gabrielle. Oh, Gabrielle is also saying thank you to everyone. She says, can I just say thank you to everyone who I invited and were so receptive. Absolutely. I also want to extend a thank you to Gabrielle. As always, I learn so much from her. I said last year during the filibuster, Gabrielle has been one of my biggest informal mentors in this kind of space. And I learned so much about the connections of neoliberalism to disability. So thank you for your thanks, Gabrielle. And also thank you to you. That's it.
Alrighty. Bye, y'all. I will end the call now.
Thanks, Ben.